Thanks, everyone. And sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm actually dialing in from Noosa today, so it's not too bad here. So here's some disclosures. Do some advisory board work and some clinical trials, but content today is my own. So I've got quite a bit of content on some of these slides, but given the time pressure, I'm going to just focus on the important bits and the background. I'm sure everybody knows flu is composed of 8 components, the H and the N that we talk about a lot because they're on the surface. They're the strains we talk about. And there is a lot of change that happens with the flu, subtle change, the drift that we see year to year. So we update our vaccine every year, but occasionally we get a big shift where we basically package up new pieces and make a completely new virus, essentially. And that's what causes pandemics. And here you can see the major ones over time. Obviously, 1918, the biggest one, which was extraordinary in terms of magnitude. But our last one in 2009, so around 15 years ago or so. So perhaps we're due for another one, which maybe we're not quite ready for, given we're still recovering from COVID. And here's some information on flu in general. Attack rates 5 to 10% per year, can be as high as 20. A third of vaccine preventable diseases. And these are perhaps some overestimates and include complications. So maybe not all directly associated, but deaths can be in the thousands, hospitalizations can be many thousand, and doctor visits and lost work days are extraordinary when we look at the magnitude of influenza. So obviously our focus has been on COVID, but flu is something that we shouldn't take for granted just yet. And if we look at what's happened in recent years, I'll touch on what happened during COVID. You can see very low lines there. We can see quite a high peak that was a little bit early and went away early last year. And then this year in the solid yellow, a little bit similar to 2019 shown in the dashed purple, but maybe went away a little bit more quickly. So a season that perhaps is returning a little bit more like what we might have seen had we not impacted things due to COVID. And if we look at what those impacts were, so in 2021, we saw 750 cases, so an extraordinary figure, indicating the success of what we did for COVID in terms of flu as well. Probably all those mitigating strategies like social distancing, mask wearing, hand hygiene, but of course the bigger things that hopefully we don't have to see again, like border closures and those sorts of things, probably had the greatest impact. But I think it is important to reflect on this so we can tell our patients, particularly our highest risk ones, that there probably is some benefit from some of those simple things like getting people to stay home when they're unwell, hand hygiene, social distancing and mask wearing, etc., which we're not really seeing to high levels at the moment, of course. And here's what happened in a little bit more detail this year so far. So some of these figures don't necessarily line up because they're from slightly different sources, but just over 210,000 lab confirmed cases. The highest rate was up here in sunny Queensland at nearly 1,200 per 100,000 population. Admissions from Sentinel hospitals, nearly 3,000, and about 2/3 of these were flu A. People might recall we saw heavily flu A predominant at the start of the season and transitioned a bit to flu B there for a period of time. Deaths, again, 90% or so of flu A, only 10% flu B. And the median age of the deaths, as we often see, was people in that older group of 75 and a half years of age. And it's important, I think, to look at the risk groups because it is a little bit different to COVID and people are tending to bundle these together. Well, I think perhaps the biggest change is the impact on children. And so with the flu, kids do contribute very significantly to the spread. And as we've seen typically, and was the same this year, highest rates of notifications and hospitalizations actually occur in children. So this year, highest rate 5 to 9 years at 2,500 per 100,000 population, followed by the youngest group of those 0 to 4 at nearly 2,000. But very fortunately, the rates of deaths are very low. I think it's important also to be mindful of the risk in pregnancy, very high. Manifestations are similar, but disease more severe. And during 2009, pregnant women comprised 5% of deaths, despite being only 1% of the population, so are overrepresented. And that's important, I think, in terms of counselling, prevention, but also therapy. But similar to COVID, age is still the greatest risk factor for death. And you can see the figures there. 75 years or older, deaths occur at the highest rate at nearly 4 per 100,000. And similar list of comorbidities that contribute to that risk as well. So our current strategy, again, as most people would be aware, because of the change every year, we do need to change our vaccine. There are relevant expert group meet in about October, looking at what's happened here, what's happening abroad, how well the vaccines worked, etc., and come up with what's usually a very good recommendation. And we don't get that information for a bit longer yet, but appears to be a pretty good match this year. And our vaccines do work very well, but there are some limitations that I've listed there. And I'm just going to quickly speak through some of the ways we address that. One of the challenges, of course, with our vaccine strategy is uptake. And here you can see what some would say we perhaps did okay in the over 65s, but it's still less than 70%. And then if you look at our higher risk groups, as I mentioned, the younger people, the rate is very low. And if we look at that rate specifically over the last few years, this is a group that's recognised as at risk. It's NIP funded, and yet look at what our rate of uptake is there. It's pretty poor, to be honest. So I think we have some work to do. Here's our current recommendation. Recommended for everyone 6 months of age and over. NIP funding there, though, for the greatest risk groups. We're recording this in the AIR, can be co-administered with the COVID vaccine. That's going to be relevant for a little while. Adults over 65 get an augmented vaccine. And our protection, we've focused so much on waning with COVID. These vaccines, of course, wane as well, 3 to 4 months, which is why we have a targeted campaign in anticipation of the peak of the season. I mentioned some limitations, immune senescence, so reduced protection in the elderly is one. Fortunately, we have some strategies to address that with improved or augmented vaccines, and they're listed there, and they're probably 20 to 25% better. One of the other challenges is we grow our current vaccines in eggs, and sometimes that process can result in the virus changing a little bit in those eggs. So now we do have cell-based vaccines that are grown in mammalian cells, indicated and approved for kids over 2 years of age, not NIP funded or not funded yet. So it is a private prescription, so one to consider. And in terms of new vaccines, we had a great talk just now on new vaccines. And one of the great things about COVID, if there are any positives, is it has accelerated the development of a number of platforms. And mRNA in particular is one that lends itself to being able to rapidly adapt to new challenges. And so makes a lot of sense for flu as well as RSV. And there are some combinations that are progressing well through clinical trials. An announcement just yesterday came suggesting that for us, we might have the combination from Moderna in 2026. There's some talk that maybe we might even have our first combination, not for next year, but perhaps the year after. And of course, the biggest challenge there is COVID is not yet seasonal. So timing of these combination vaccines will be a bit of a challenge, but hopefully it will go at least some way to helping with uptake. Treatment, I think our focus on COVID antivirals has made many lose sight a little bit of antivirals for flu, a little bit of controversy as to their benefit, but as Cochrane often do, a failure to show an effect does not mean they've been proven to not be effective. And I still think there are groups for which benefit is likely, but like most antivirals, timing of initiation is critical. And so this can be a bit challenging. So we want to start this within at least 2 days of symptom onset. In pregnant women, given the risk that I've mentioned, we started anyway, even if it's outside that window. And because of the challenging logistics, difficulties accessing lab tests, etc., I think it's important to, particularly at high transmission times, to discuss with our highest risk patients, those that might benefit, maybe how they might get hold of these more quickly. And so rapid antigen tests are increasingly available for flu as well. They can make people eligible. But if there's a significant delay in testing and we're at a time where there's lots of flu around, you can consider giving it while we wait for the test results. And I've just mentioned there that I still think there's a role for laboratory-based testing, given the properties there. We can work out what flus are around in greater resolution, greater sensitivity. We can look for other viruses if the flu is negative, and it helps to contribute to some of that data that I've presented. So I know I've flown through that very quickly, just a very brief conclusion. So obviously, despite our focus on COVID and the period of time where we had very low flu, the flu is back. Its epidemiology may be slightly altered by what we did with COVID, but it's certainly back. It's important to consider those that are highest risk, children, particularly highest rates of notifications and hospitalizations. Pregnant women are an important group. Vaccination is a very important tool. We're very fortunate in this country to have lots of great options, NIP funding for those at highest risk, but our uptake is still not where it needs to be. New vaccine options are recently available and many more are coming, and we need to not forget about antiviral therapy, particularly in those that are highest risk. And I think that's my time. Thank you very much.